Hey guys, so welcome back to the second part of SAS lecture. So last lecture we had a bit of an introduction on SAS, its application, and we looked at how to install it and how to run in a code a playground environment. So let's just recap what we learned. And so first of all, SAS means synthetically awesome style sheet. That's the name of SAS. You can also call it sassy CSS, and also it's a next extension, which is SCSS. So mostly nowadays people use this extension, which is SCSS. Nobody uses actually this extension, but it's still called SAS. So okay, so SAS is equal to SCSS. And what is SAS? SAS is nothing but a better syntax compared to CSS. It has a lot of features, like you can build variables, you can build mix-ins, you can have inheritance, things like that. And we also looked at nesting in last lecture. Your browser actually only understands CSS. It doesn't understand SAS. So the way it works is it helps you write better syntax. So you create a file with SCSS extension where you write your SAS syntax. And then once you're done with it, you run this command that would convert your SAS into the CSS that your browser understands. So that's the secret. And so you would never modify your CSS files. You always modify your SAS files, and it automatically produces CSS. So that's why SAS is nothing but a preprocessor. So here's a SAS file that you run this preprocessor that would convert into CSS. So installation, we looked at two ways to do it. One is a playground. For example, you can use CodePen if you are just learning initially and you don't want to install it on your computer. It's completely okay. You can just play around with it, have some example, practice a little bit before creating a project. But ultimately, if you want to use it in your project, you have to have SAS on your computer. So you need that preprocessor set up on your computer. So to run the command line installation, if you're using VS Code, VS Code comes with a command line tool. So whether you are on Mac or PC, doesn't matter. You open a VS Code and open a command line from there. And then from there, you would go into the project folder that you just created and run a few steps. So one is npm install SAS, and you have to use this -g so that it installs it globally on your computer. So it doesn't matter which project you're working on, you have access to that preprocessor from any project. And that's the best way to do it. And then you will create some SAS file. Let's say here we created input.scss, and then you write your SAS format syntax inside that file. Once you're done, you can run this command SAS --watch input.scss space output.css. This means watch the changes in input.scss. Whenever I change input.scss and save it, it automatically identifies that change and reruns for you this preprocessor. So it would output the output.scss automatically. So you don't have to do it. And that's the beauty of it. Otherwise, you have to, every time you have to run this command, which is not a good idea. So if you don't run it, if you run it without watch, then you have to do that. Okay. So let's look at it from that point. And we also learned a few things, how to define variable in SAS and how to do nesting. So let's go back and run that again so we can refresh our mind. So here I have set it up. Let me remove these files first of all from previously created. and delete here. Okay, so to open the terminal, there is in the VS Code, there is a terminal. You can create a new terminal and it opens up here like that. Okay, as you can see, I'm inside the project. So what I will do, I will write the sass format. And remember, if I want to create a variable, for example, I can create, let's say, my color or something. And I want to set it up as red. So I would simply do red, right? So that's my variable. And then if I want to use it inside one of my classes, let's say my class is, let's say, some container. And inside I want to say, color is, let's say, red. But instead of saying red, I'm just going to use this variable, my color. And I have to use this $sign. Now, $sign variable, that's not CSS syntax, as you can recognize it, right? So this creates a variable, and when I run the preprocessor, it would take this red color and basically write it here. Okay, so if I have another container, for example, let's say container number 2, I can have the same color here. Okay, so now save this, and then I'm going to run that command, sass -- watch this file, input.scss, input.scss, and where should the output go? So it's output.css. And you don't have to really have this name. I'm just giving it so that it's more intuitive and so you'd understand, but you can have any main.scss that produces main.scss producing, let's say, main.css or something like that, right? So if I run this, as you can see, it compiled and it created this output.css. And as you can see, it saved its, replaced my color with this red. So now anytime I want to change this red to green, for example, I don't have to change multiple places. And again, if I just simply save this, as you can see, because I'm watching, it compiled again. And here it's green. So it's so easy, right? In a smaller environment like this, you don't see the value, but when you have a giant project and you are changing multiple things, and so it basically saves you a lot of time by doing this, right? So this is one of the example of how to define a variable. Let's look at the nesting that we did, right? Oftentimes you want to say there is some element, let's say element 1, that is inside my container, right? And I can, by nesting, I can write it like this, parent-child relationship. And when I save it, it actually writes the way CSS understands a parent-child relationship, which is this. It's almost like a, not parent-child relationship, it's, I would say, ancestor-child relationship. Okay. So yeah, this is how you can nest in Sass. Okay, now let's move further. What else can you do with Sass? There are lots of things you can do with Sass, actually. For example, let's say if I want to have fonts and colors, and I want to have, let's say, tons of different colors. For example, in a typical project, a designer would give you a list of colors that you can use in your project. And you're only supposed to use one of those colors because only then your website would be would look like more coherent, because you are pretty much, for certain things, you're using certain colors across all the pages, right? So it does make sense to define your color palette separately in a file. And all those colors are nothing but variables, right? Typically when you write CSS, you would, inside the element, you would say, okay, color means nothing but a font color, and I'm just gonna use this color green, and usually you use hash color, right? RGB or hash color, for example, something like this, right? Here I'm using RGB, or I can use hash color. However, instead of using directly here, I can define a separate file for variable, which I can do. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to call it colors, but I am using it as a separate file, which I'm going to call partials, right? Because ultimate job is to create one single file. You can create actually multiple CSS files that you attach multiple places, but here my job is to create one file. Okay, so the partials can be used in multiple files as well. So let's create a partial called color, and I'm just going to give it extension as CSS. How do we know something is a partial? Because of the underscore. Now let's take the color that we have. I'm just going to move this partial, the color inside this color.scss file. Okay. And here I can say, let's say, border color. Let's have another color called background color. Let's say, let's have an ugly page, you know, red as a background color. Then, you know, you can have something called on hover color or something like that. Let's have that as a yellow. Okay, so we have 3 colors. I also want to use some fonts. So instead of putting inside the color, which doesn't make sense, I'm going to create another partial called fonts. So let's call it fonts.scss. Let's call this colors.scss instead, which makes more sense. Okay, so for the font, we can have, I'm just going to use one font. Let's say font 1 or something. Okay. Your website can have multiple fonts, so you know you can name whatever. Here I'm just going to use, let's say, Helvetica and sans, let's say, serif, and font 2 would be some fancy font that doesn't exist. Okay, you have to obviously import it and all that stuff. So, all right, so we have 2 fonts and we have, I said, 3 colors. Now I can use it in my input.scss. How do I use it here? I need some way to import that file inside here. So I'm just going to remove this my color, which doesn't make sense anymore. So, okay, so the partials are used using @use directive. And so I can say @use, let's say color. I can also import it, but I'm just going to use color here, which means colors actually. And it automatically understands that this color says nothing but this color. Okay, I don't have to use underscore here. And then if I want to use that one of the colors here, I would have to simply do this. I can say colors dot, and I would use one of the colors. Let's say use a border color. So I would have to say border, and colors dot, well, usually border is, 1 pixel, solid, and then you would use a color, right? So I would say colors dot this guy. Okay. Now I'm gonna format this document, and then let's add some font color as well. Let's save this guy. Again, it gives me some errors here because it doesn't recognize my color. So let's have some font color. Let's have it as blue. So here I would say colors dot font color. All right, so it compiled the output.scss. I'm just gonna not save it. Okay, so as you can see that it has substituted the color in input file, the color.border color, which is nothing but border color is green. So in output I have a green color, and then font color, which is blue. So it automatically substituted it. Okay, so this is doing a use. Or there's another way, which is doing nothing but import. So I can say import colors, and so it simply imports the entire file. In that case, I don't really have to use this. And as soon as I save it, you would see it will compile and it produces the same thing. Okay, so import is a little better syntax because then you don't have to use a prefix, colors dot something every time, as if you have defined inside this file, and it works seamlessly. Okay, if I want to use fonts, then I would do add import and fonts. And now I can say font family is, let's say, is font 1. And for this guy, I can say font family is the fancy fonts, which you can define. You can use some Google font or whatever. I'm just gonna call it a fancy. Oh, why is it changed to font? Oh, font 2, yeah, which is a fancy font. Okay, so if I look at the output, it has substituted the first one, Helvetica and Sans Serif, and for the second one, it has substituted the fancy font, which is correct. Okay, now you can use this CSS file, you can link it to HTML, and it's ready to go. Whenever you want to change something in here, you don't really go and change here, you go and change here. If manager comes back and say, hey, you know what? Font color blue doesn't look that great. We want to change it to, let's click here. We want to change it to purple. Okay, no problem. Just one place, and it has changed to purple, as you can see. So that's the beauty of using partials. It lets you organize things nicely. Okay, so now that you know how to organize things, there are other powerful things that you can use in CSS. For example, if you know in old days, you had a lot of things that were really painful. For example, you had different browsers. Like for example, if I want to write some style for let's say IE or Firefox, I would have to write separate, and it was quite painful. I was repeating things everywhere. So how do you deal with that? So there is an easier way to do it. For example, let's say if I want to have something called transform. If I want to write transform, different browsers understands it differently. Okay, your one browser can simply understand transform, but IE, certain version of IE, it doesn't understand, so you have to provide a different syntax, right? So for that, we can do something called mixins. Mixins are nothing but these tiny functions. So let's create one. Usually I would create a separate file for mixins, but here, in order to understand it, it's much easier to just create something here. So let's create that function transform. So I would use a mixin directive, and it has @mixin and some name. Okay, and I'm gonna call it transform. Okay, and you want to keep the name as close to the actual property so that it's easy to read. Okay, now typically you would have transform, and you would have some value. Okay, transform, you know, rotate 30 degree or something, right? So rotate, let's say 50 degrees. Okay, that's one of the typical value. But you also want to have a way to pass that in, so you don't have to marry to that 50 degree. Let's say if tomorrow somebody comes in and say, hey, you know, one place I want to transform 50 degree, another place I want to transform 30 degrees. Now, in that case, you have to create two transforms, right? Which is not a good idea. So in Sass, you can create a functional like syntax. You know, you have a function name, and then you have some sort of parameter, right? Or property, argument, should I say, that you can pass in. So that would be your property. Let's call it DEG, for example. Okay. Now, here I can simply write DEG, or actually I can pass the entire thing here, but let's just pass this for now. You have to put $sign here in front. Okay, so when I use this transform, I can pass any particular value and it would transform based on that. So let's use this in our code somewhere, right? So if I want to use a transform here, I have to use something called include. All right, so I would have to say @include, and then I would say transform, and then I would have to provide the degree. So let's provide 40 degrees or 40 degree, something like that. Okay, and now if I save this, it compiles and I can see that transform rotate 40 degrees. All fine. Somewhere if I want to use 30 degrees, I can do the same thing here. And instead of 40, I can have 30 degrees. And then if I go back here, it's now allowed me to do that. What if I want to do browser specific, right? So I want to be compatible with IE and other browsers. I can write, because it's a function kind of thing, I can write that. So in IE, you would write something like this, ms dash transform, and then same, rotate degree. Okay. When I save this, now it produces 2, right? Imagine if I have to write this and change this multiple places, it would be a nightmare. Here I can just have one mixin that can be used everywhere. And that's just a Microsoft. What if I want to have a WebKit or Mozilla or something, right? So I can say WebKit kind of browsers, and it also has a transform, and it has a rotate. Let's pass some degrees in it. Okay, let's save this, and now it writes all of these styles automatically. And so I don't have to do it. I just have to control one function. And this is, I'm using 2 places. Imagine in your large project, you may have a generic transfer function that you can use, let's say 500 different places. And so this one function can control all of that and provides you much flexibility that you would need in a typical project. So mixins are a great way to do that instead of having this MS and WebKit. You can have multiple functionality that allow that you can present and that it would write it. Like so for example, let's say if let's say if you want to combine multiple properties and provide that. So let's say border and font family, it's one combination. Some places you want to use one pixel border and Helvetica, and you want to be able to customize that. In that case, you can create your mixin accordingly, and you can have 2 arguments. Okay, and this way you have to figure out what is the need in a particular project, and you can use that accordingly. And it's because it's so flexible, you have to find a way, you have to find an application for it, and SAS format would allow you to do that. So yeah, having SAS gives you much more control over your CSS stuff that you can't find in CSS natively. Now you have this available to you. You can do inheritance. So this is more like inheritance. This is more like composition, because you're composing multiple things and you're applying. So we have 2 patterns available for you inside SAS, composition and inheritance, and you can use both. It's not like pure inheritance, but you can see like a parent-child relationship, right? Okay, now let's move to homework. If you learn something, you have to practice, right? And homework is the best way to do it. So this will be an easy homework, and I usually like to give homework directly inside the video so you can watch it, and because it has a visual reference, you would understand better. So let's create a file here. So we want to utilize everything that we learned. Okay, so first thing we learn is variables, and we can have partials. So let's create, just like I did, 2 files. Okay, to create 2 partials. One for color and one for your fonts. And feel free to create, list of fonts. For example, you can use Google font or some native fonts, whatever. And if you want to import it, if you know how to do it, that even better. As for the color, you can create something like this, a border color, background color. You can have multiple background color, whatever. Just create a file with a bunch of colors. You can use the color names that are available. You can use hex colors, RGB colors, or combination of it. right? And that would help you learn faster. The second thing you want to do is create the mixin. Okay, and the mixin would be, I should say create mixin, create a mixin. Mixin would allow you to kind of a mix and match font and a color. So I would call this mixin and colors, fonts and colors. Okay, it is what it says, and it takes two arguments. One is the color property, and second is the font property. So I can pass red and Helvetica, and it gives me a combination of both. Okay, so that works fine. Then for nesting, we want to create nesting of, let's say, elements. So we can have 3 elements. We can have grandpa element or grandpa class, and it has child called dad class, and it would have a child class. Okay, and then you can use mixings to define font colors. Of the child. Okay. So let's repeat this. So first you create 2 partials, one for colors and one for fonts that you can use in your main input.css. Then you would create a mixing called font and colors. You can name whatever you want, but it will take 2 arguments. One is color, one font. Just like here, I have a degree with only 1 argument. You can have it 2 arguments, right? And then you create a nested element. So for example, here I have container element. Inside you can have a grandfather, dad, and a child. Okay, so that relationship. And at the root level at child, you would have some font, family, and some color, right? So that defines the property of that child. And you can use a mixins to define the font color and child of this child. So you're using variables, you're using mixins, you're using partials, and you're using nesting to do all of that.